The tensions between the United States and Western powers on one side and the Islamic Republic of Iran on the other are rooted in decades of geopolitical rivalry, ideological conflict, and competing visions of power in the Middle East. This modern confrontation can be traced back to the 1953 CIA and British-backed overthrow of Iran's democratically elected prime minister, an event that sowed deep mistrust of the West within Iran and set the stage for decades of fraught relations. After the 1979 Iranian Revolution transformed Iran into an Islamic republic, relations collapsed completely, highlighted by the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis and Iran's transformation into a regional power challenging Western influence. Over the ensuing decades, the U.S. and its allies, especially Israel and Gulf Arab states, grew increasingly wary of Tehran's support for armed proxies in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, and its ambitions in ballistic missiles and nuclear technology. Western governments and the U.S. have consistently framed Iran's nuclear program as a threat to regional and global security, despite Tehran's insistence it is for peaceful purposes and its repeated proposals for verification and diplomatic solutions. These disputes contributed to the 2015 nuclear agreement and its effective collapse after the U.S. withdrawal in 2018, followed by years of sanctions, intermittent negotiations in Geneva aimed at constraining enrichment and easing punitive measures, and repeated cycles of diplomatic impasse. Each major stakeholder in this conflict has distinct objectives that reflect wider strategic interests. The United States and many Western powers have sought to prevent Iran from ever acquiring nuclear weapons, to limit its ballistic missile capabilities, and to curb its support for militant groups seen as destabilizing forces. They also aim to protect allies such as Israel and Gulf states and to secure maritime routes, especially the Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of the world's oil passes. Tehran's leadership, for its part, aims to preserve the Islamic Republic's sovereignty, resist what it sees as Western attempts at domination, and retain the nuclear and missile capabilities it regards as essential to deterrence and national pride. Iran has additionally expanded its influence via proxy alliances and asymmetric tactics, seeing these as leverage against superior Western military power. Regional actors such as Israel view Iran's capabilities as direct threats, while European states have oscillated between concern over proliferation and calls for renewed diplomacy. Root causes of the confrontation include the deep ideological divide between Western liberal democracies and Iran's revolutionary theocratic system, decades of US sanctions and economic pressure that have devastated Iran's economy, and mutual fears over strategic dominance in the Middle East. Iran's uranium enrichment to higher levels than under past agreements and its continuing ballistic missile advances have repeatedly escalated these fears, leading to cycles of negotiation and military threats. The US role in regional conflicts, combined with Iran's backing of non-state armed groups, has further entangled rival interests and hardened attitudes on both sides. The impacts of this long conflict have been profound. Regionally, it has fueled wars and proxy battles in Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and Iraq, contributing to vast human suffering, displacement, and destruction. Iran's economy has suffered under sanctions that curtailed exports and foreign investment, aggravating public discontent and sparking mass protests in recent years. Global energy markets have also been affected, with spikes in oil prices tied to heightened tensions around key transit choke points. Domestically, political repression and economic hardship in Iran have generated cycles of unrest that the leadership has often met with force. After years of tension and stalled diplomacy, recent months have seen a dramatic escalation. In February 2026, the US and Israel launched a large-scale military operation known as Operation Lion's Roar, striking Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure in Tehran and other cities, and assassinating Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, a figure whose decades in power were defined by staunch opposition to the West. Iran responded with widespread missile and drone attacks across the Gulf region targeting US forces, Israeli territory, and allied states, in a significant widening of hostilities. The conflict has already caused casualties on all sides, disrupted global aviation routes, drawn emergency international diplomatic efforts, and triggered urgent debates among Western allies wary of a wider war. Looking ahead, the future of U.S.-Iran relations remains highly uncertain but pivotally important for global stability. On one hand, there is still international diplomatic pressure and negotiation aimed at reining in nuclear dangers and establishing new frameworks for peace. On the other, ongoing violence and mutual mistrust risk deeper regional conflagration. If diplomatic avenues can be revived, perhaps through sustained negotiations that address nuclear, missile, and proxy concerns, an unstable peace could emerge. Yet if military actions continue or expand without a clear political solution, the conflict risks prolonged instability, broader regional warfare, and further economic shocks. Ultimately, the trajectory will depend on whether strategic patience and negotiation can outweigh the incentives for force and domination that have defined much of this troubled relationship.